Mike, I want to get a board perspective because I got a lot of feedback on this concept on whether or not to do projects all together or to break them into pieces. There's a lot here involved. Can you give me just kind of a broad spectrum, Mike, of what you're involved in? And I don't want you to mention your community or get too much into details. So you could kind of fudge the numbers here a little bit, just so we're talking broad strokes and we're educating people.
We began a project that required a large amount of changes and improvements to the environment that we live in. And we hired an engineering company to work with the board so that we had an understanding of what we're really seeking to accomplish. Because at the end of a project, the engineer is the one who's accountable for the work that has been performed.
I'm familiar with your association. Let me make some broad statements. There's two buildings. They're over 30 stories each. It's on the coast. It really has not been maintained properly since the day it's been built. Your board found themselves in a position where it needed a tremendous amount of deck work, concrete work. So I want the audience to understand the scope of this project and how incredibly large it is. And I wouldn't mind if you gave a ballpark number if you're comfortable doing that also.
We decided that we needed to do a complete study, engineering on the structural components of the building and to filter in whether or not there is any safety requirements necessary. As you're aware of, this goes into the insurance industry. We needed to come up with an understanding of a financial exposure over the next 2 to 5 years and what it meant to the community, whether or not we had reserves and how much we had in reserves and whether or not assessments would be necessary. And it was a long process to get to the end result. And the engineer was a key component to providing us some strong data for us to proceed with the project. Now, it was asked on what the numbers could be. You can range those numbers anywhere from 15 million to $40 million when you take in all of the projects. Each project is separate, but when you start looking at the future for a 5 year, 7 year, that's the number you could be seeking to improve the environment. And as we know, numbers change each year, so you do an update on your reserve study to ensure that you're meeting the requirements.
You probably weren't shocked by the 15 million. Were you shocked by the original number?
I actually thought it would have been a little bit more than that. And as you go along, there's always adjustments on the work that was required because when they begin the project, they find other areas that needed to be addressed that was not picked up by the engineer initially, that you're going to have change orders that would increase the cost of the project overall. And one of the areas that we addressed was how are we going to fund this project and introduce it to the community in a very methodical way so that they have an understanding of the necessity to go ahead with the project.
What was the process? How did you come to the process of deciding what you're going to do all at once compared to putting it out in pieces? Because the easy route would have been and kick the can down the road.
Board's responsibility is to ensure safety of every resident in the community and not look at just the financial package. When we reviewed the projects, and we have probably 5 major areas that we have to address within the next 10 years, we we ascertained the information from the engineer on which they believe is the most important one to address. And we focused on that first with the understanding that we had to plan the second project, maybe coinciding with the first project, but focus our attention to where we need to improve the environment and the safety conditions of the residents. And we looked at grants and loans and internal reserves, and we went through that whole process before we even made a decision so we could factor in what our exposure is financially to all the membership. And we knew this was going to be a very difficult sell, but it was necessary. And the board's position is that if we don't follow what's necessary, then we are personally not be, we could be held responsible for any action that wasn't taken. Board's responsibility is to ensure safety of every resident in the community and not look at just the financial package.
People have this gut reaction like it's a safety issue. Well, it doesn't mean that the building's going to fall apart at that very moment. But what it does mean, Mike, is maybe you could take it from there a little bit.
So if you look at safety as a way of selling to the community what needs to be done, look at a garage. A garage takes a lot of wear and tear. If you live on a beachfront, you know that the salt there is deteriorating some of the concrete, and you have to be worried about the structure. So safety is that you do an inspection of the garage itself, make sure that the load bearing is correct, nothing has deteriorated, and if it has, how you're going to address it and how it's going to be done in stages, so you don't inconvenience the community too much, but you know that the garage is a necessity for everyone to use. And that's an example of one of the safety issues. It doesn't mean that the building is collapsing. It means that you're repairing what's necessary so that you don't run into future problems.
You have legal obligations, you have governmental requirements, which have gotten very, very strict. You even have insurance company requirements. I'm assuming there's so many factors here that the board has to put into play.
One of the areas that we concentrated on is hiring a construction attorney, because that has a major impact on any RFP, request for proposal, that you're submitting to various companies, and you want to make sure that they're meeting all of your requirements. And at the same time, you contact the insurance company of what your intent is, because the insurance company then goes to the carriers and provides you what they believe is the type of coverage that any GC, general contractor, may require when they submit a bid to the community, so that it follows the safety of the finances of the community. You're not caught into not having enough insurance in case the general contractor doesn't meet the standards that's within the contract itself. One of the major areas that I was involved with is I did not want any subcontractors. Whomever we were hiring had to be a direct contractor, because if anything goes wrong, it could end up in litigation and it could point fingers to various different companies who are subcontractors. So my first goal was to get a contracting company that could perform the tasks that we require.
Are you comfortable talking about what some of the repairs?
So let's use in a high-rise building a balcony as an example. A balcony is structured to withstand a certain amount of weight load, and there is post tension in the structure of the balcony. There could be rebars that are part of the structure of the building. So to evaluate each balcony, you would have to scope it out, and then you would have to ensure that all of the rebars and are intact, and the structure is, without a doubt, there is no issues to it. However, if it's not maintained for a long period of time, you're going to run into many of the areas that have been, either the rebar has snapped or it's no longer enforced, and you have to do some exploratory and then repair on it. And that is a major undertaking, because the contractor has to be certified to be able to do that project. It's just not hiring somebody who pours some concrete over it and it's repaired. So that was one of the major areas that we had to address.
So you're talking about concrete work, you're talking about 30 stories and above, two buildings. You're talking about, which I know, a parking garage underneath. You're talking about scaffolding also. Just about everything you could imagine you're talking about. And a lot of these projects have to happen at once. They need to be coordinated. Is that accurate, Mike?
That is accurate. Visualize that you're walking through New York City or any major city, and you see all this shedding, we call it covering, on the sidewalk to protect any resident or somebody walking from debris falling. Well, imagine now you go into a residential or a area that's by the beach, and everyone that moved there wants the enjoyment of seeing the beach. They don't want to see this massive equipment. And what happens is, as soon as you go into this project, which is probably a 2 to 2.5 year project, they lose that ability to be able to enjoy what they brought into the community. But it's a necessity and a requirement that it has to be done by state law, and protect yourself on the insurance aspect behind it. And that was a big selling point to the community about the inconvenience that they're going to be faced with. And the options are none. There is no other way of getting around it.
But you didn't just look at one or two items. You looked at about how many different items?
A board's obligation with the management company, if you happen to have one, or if you're self-managed, is to plan a capital improvement for 5 to 10 years down the line that's updated yearly, so you know where you're headed. We look down at the next 5 years of major capital improvements that were required. And when I say major, these are items that must be done. It may take longer than 5 years, but they're critical for the benefit of the community. And what we did was we came up with what we believe to be a financial requirement for 5 years. Now, beyond that, it's very hard to predict because economics change. There's a shortage of equipment, personnel, etc. And we budgeted a specific amount of money, and we took it upon ourselves to hire a company to go out and seek how a loan could be developed for us with a long-term investment. So finances is the critical path before you begin any project whatsoever. And to introduce that to the community, they have to know what it means to your operating expense and what assessment and how much this will be for them over the next 5 years. It will change. Hopefully it gets better, but normally when you get yourself involved with these type of projects, it's going to continue for a period of time.
Is there anything that you wanted to add before we hand this over to Michelle?
You don't want to confuse the community on who's going to do work and when they're performing the task. Be very clear of the hours of operation, the noise volume that's going to be created, so that they feel as though the association really cares about them, but still needs to do the work. And you're always going to get the complaints from the residents, but it's minimized by the actions taken by the association.
I think we've exhaustively painted you a picture of an example of a board that had a tremendous amount of hard decisions, maybe the hardest scenario there could be. Take it from there, from the engineering aspect. It seems like this was a lot to ask of volunteers.
You're absolutely right. While he was talking, I kept thinking of this case study that I just found that we had, and I had no idea it existed. And it's a really remarkable one where we worked with these two identical communities, sister communities, we'll call them Condo East and Condo West, built at the exact same time, 1980s, mid-rise buildings, drastically underfunded, ton of deferred maintenance, a lot of work that needed to be done. Did the initial reserve studies in 2012, outlined a variety of recommendations. Condo East followed them to a T. A decade later, they're in a beautiful spot. They did all the work. They were able to replace the roof, replace the boiler system. They've renovated all their lobbies and hallways, so even done some of the discretionary projects. And their dues are roughly the reserve contribution, $380 per unit per month. Condo West didn't follow it at all. They only increased dues over that decade 5%, which isn't even keeping up with inflation, right? So continuing to spiral. Have not been able to place the roof. It's now going to cost 40% more at least than what Condo East paid for it. Have not renovated the hallways or lobbies and replaced the boilers via special assessment. Their recommendation is more than double what Condo East was, and then we still have recommendations to ramp them up. Like they need to get to over double. It's like over 900 a month per unit, and then they still need to ramp up from there, right? And so the longer you wait on these things, the more catch up you have, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And Mike kind of grabbing it and running with it is the best thing that he could have done for his association. It absolutely is hard to swallow as a resident. They're blindsided, probably unaware of the situation that they're in. But it only gets worse the longer you wait. So I applaud Mike because it is not an easy feat, and he, in my opinion, executed it perfectly. You need to look at all the long-term needs and then really focus on this 5-year horizon and be very, very transparent about everything and do the best you can. I taught a presentation yesterday, and the remediation specialist said, "So what should we be doing if it's loud? How do you appease residents?" And she's like, "Nothing. You can't. Like, it's going to be loud, right?" Which is what you guys alluded to. It's going to be loud. They were transparent about it. They found a spot to try and make it as comfortable as possible, and we're really open with everything that they're doing. And so I think he handled it beautifully. And ultimately, in my mind, Mike is a leader. He's a board president and he's leading his association. He is expected to cover a variety of things, and you have to bring in experts to do that, right? He can't be an expert in everything. And it sounds like he relied on the experts to help him work through this from like a legal perspective, engineering execution perspective, a really great group, right? He had a team behind him to execute this. The only piece that would need to be supplemented if you don't have those leadership skills that Mike has is that's actually a role in our space too. There are strategic planners that work in the community association space that help with the overall execution plan, how you communicate it to residents, hiring some of the professionals. So that's the one piece that if you don't have that as a board president or a board, you hire a specialist for that too. And that's their role.
Boards underestimate marketing. They underestimate how important it is to sell this kind of project and the importance of kind of building it up, right? Almost like a story. Do you agree, Michelle? Boards almost need some help, professional help, if they can't manage it on their own, on how to sell this to the community, because like you said, the impact of the noise and the financial impact, it's huge.
Huge. I'm probably surprised by it, right? They live about their lives and don't see some of these things from a day that when they're parking in the garage, they're not looking at the structural concerns, right? They're pulling in their parking spot and unloading their groceries. And so it is a bit of a shock. And so I think communicating the why, the how, what we're going to do about it, how we're going to fix it, and the overall strategy is absolutely crucial.
Michelle, you hit a right. You made a statement that is you're right on the mark with. Communication to the residents is the critical path of success. We actually hired a project manager that facilitates all the communications, gives a timeline, lets the residents know when they have to vacate. They give a complete overview of where we're at, what was done, what was not done, and if there's any delays. But one of the key for any success is communication. We have monthly meetings with the community outside of the open board meeting. And we do this every few weeks, and we give a presentation and we give pictures, a pictorial of the before and the after. We open it up for questions about how we're proceeding and why it was necessary. We even bring in the engineers that give a presentation and they give a video of how the post tension could snap and what it would mean to all the residents. We get everyone engaged with information that they can take back and question. The ones who participate understand it. The ones who don't always have someone else who could do a better job than what the board is doing right now.
Michelle, any closing thoughts? And then I'll go to Mike for closing thoughts.
Completely agree. Communication. The only thing, and I am sure Mike already thought of this, is that it's not just the 5-year horizon. And I'm sure this certainly came up with the bank as part of the loan, is what else do we have, right? There's probably elevators, mechanical equipment, plumbing that will also work in as a need. And so I think it's helpful when the board and when the residents are ready to make sure that that conversation is part of it too, if it hasn't been already. It's just the overall, this is the immediate need, and long-term, this is the outlook and how we're anticipating moving forward long-term.
Last word on this, and thank you so much for being here, Mike, and letting our audience hear from a real board member that's going through this.
Don't rely upon making a decision without having the professionals involved. Let them guide you. Let them give you advice. Sit down and understand what they're suggesting. Get a hold of your attorney. Get a hold of your contractors. Get a hold of your insurance. Have everyone engaged before a project begins so you understand the magnitude that you're going to be involved with over a period of time, and it could be 10 years. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact is everyone needs to be involved, and the board needs to take a step back and be the body that oversees it and ensures that it's meeting all the standards. But the professionals are the ones who are putting it together for you to make those decisions.
Are you going to survive, Mike?
Well, I have to ask my wife that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll check back with Mike a year from now, audience, to see if he did indeed survive this gigantic project. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Mike.